Okay.
Well, we should probably start the show. It's already started. So in this episode of the Contractor Commute,
Yeah.
which
What are we going to talk about today,
yes,
Ben?
well, I think there's this weight we feel as business owners in conversations we have with our team, with our customers, is that we're supposed to know a lot about what we're doing, right? And where people ask questions of us, they have expectations that we at least feel, whether they're real or not, that we should be experts in our particular field.
Yeah, niche field.
Yes,
whatever.
right. Whatever it is that we're supposed to know, we better know it.
We better know everything about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And today's episode, we're going to kind of challenge that assumption somewhat because I think it's very freeing when you get to the point of feeling like you can ask questions of yourself and of others. And one thing I'm beginning to learn is the smartest people are the ones that ask the most questions. They're very inquisitive people. The more I know, the more I learn, the more I realize how little I know. Because it's sort of like this beginner syndrome that we all have when we get into something. And it's like, how hard could it be? I mean, just do the thing, get it done, and then you start doing it yourself. If it's a sport, I mean, you played volleyball.
I did.
And if somebody watched what you did and say, oh, it looks so easy. Until you get out there on the court and try doing it. It's like so anything, hard. Yeah. Tennis. I remember playing tennis. Building a house. Yeah, right. Oh, yeah. It just should fit together. It should just work.
Yeah.
And if you had any practice doing it or tried doing it yourself, you start realizing, wow, that's a skill.
Actually,
and
very hard.
You admire it. I had a friend that I'd play tennis with, and he would, and he was, I mean, we're like 4.5, whatever the rating is. You know, it's
I don't
like
know anything about tennis. You can tell me about that. What is
learning.
the rating of tennis? Let's ask.
It's like it's wrong. Sam, look it up. What is the tennis rating? But anyway, it's basically we're like mid-level kind of like amateurs. Very average amateurs. Yes. And he was saying they had a professional match playing, and he's like, "Oh, we can play those guys." I'm like, "Are you kidding me? We get murdered." Andy Roddick beats an amateur player with a frying pan.
Has that actually been done?
Yes. Yeah. Pro tennis player beats an amateur with a frying pan. He's like, you won't even win a point. Yeah. You know, they're that level. Yeah. But nonetheless, I'm veering way off topic. Off topic. That's rabbit hole. Here we go. But nonetheless, I think what I'm trying to get at, very long-winded approach to it. We're losing people.
We need some examples.
Is the fact that we don't necessarily challenge the assumptions about things. We need to ask more questions. We need to be more intuitive or more inquisitive about things. Asking questions is a superpower.
Yeah.
So how do we use questions? I mean, and I think and even when should we know when we should be asking questions?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, answer that, right? When should you, because I think it's a skill. Asking questions is a skill.
That's a good point.
So you have to practice it like anything else. And I remember in school, we were kind of joking about this, of like my teachers being like, there's no such thing as a dumb question, you know?
And then you get to college, like,
and then you ask all the dumb questions.
That is such a dumb question. Yeah.
Exactly. But I mean, I think that there's certain moments, if you allow space for conversations, like, you know what I mean? Like not trying to rush to your next point or your next statement, like you're able to actually get to, I think people are on the same page a lot more than we actually give credit for if you ask questions, right? Like, because you can actually like see another perspective and get to the other place. So, I mean, when should you ask questions? When should, you ask questions of a customer or a vendor or or yourself, or, we talked about some of those different scenarios.
It's so diffusing to ask a question when there's any kind of conflict or emotion involved, when you're saying, I would like to understand this. I remember going to a project, we were as a commercial job, the inspector showed up and he was ready to fail the job. And I had talked earlier to the plan examiner about our building method and what fire suppression systems we needed in place. And he said, yeah, that's fine. And so I had made the statement to the building inspector. I had talked to the plan examiner and he said, this is fine. And immediately his reaction was, I will shut this job down so hard. And you will, like he was right there, level 10, as though I said, okay, I needed to take a step back and tell him I am wanting to understand this. And so then I go into question mode of saying, can you show me I want to learn about this. I'm not challenging you. I'm just wanting to understand this better. Where is that in the code? Not as in the, where's that in the code?
Yeah, not an insult.
Right. Not
but
as
yeah.
interrogating him, but more or less being, we need to be on the same page I need to let him know that I wanted to be compliant.
Yeah.
That we want to get through this. And so I think
Yeah.
that's a big element of asking questions when there's hostility
Yeah.
or the temperature in the room is
Yeah.
rising.
Yeah. Or it could go that way.
Yeah.
I remember I was on a job a couple weeks ago, and we were at a project with the super on the job.
Yep.
And walking through it with a homeowner, and the homeowner's looking at things. She hasn't seen them for a long time. She's like excited about some of the changes that have happened or whatever. We get downstairs, and she's looking at like the fireplace, where the fireplace is going to be. The drywall was, framing and drywall was done since she'd been there last. And she was like, well, where's the TV going to go? Like she was like very specifically, she's like, there's not enough outlets there, like for the TV. And so calmly, I saw like the super just be like, do you want us to change it?
Wow.
You know what I mean? Like, and it's so diffused that, instead of being like, well, it wasn't in the plans, or you didn't say you wanted another outlet there, or, you know what I mean? Like, it could have gone one of two ways. And I felt like it was managed so well, handled so well, because it was just like, hey, we're on the same team. We're trying to get this project done to your liking, kind of coming alongside each other and just being like, hey, do you want us to change that for you? There was a couple times as we were walking through the job, and it was just, I don't know, I thought it was really enlightening of even a question as simple as that, like just letting your customer decide. I thought was a nice call out of a question,
Yeah. When there's a disagreement, you mentioned earlier, sometimes you're on the same page with somebody.
Mm-hmm.
I think so often the questions help us arrive at perspective as well.
Yeah.
Because we make assumptions as human beings about what the other person's perspective is based on what we think.
Mm-hmm.
And so therefore, when it doesn't compute, doesn't reconcile, we think, well, what an idiot, as opposed to being like, that person has deeply held beliefs about their perspective, just as valid from their perspective as yours.
Mm-hmm.
And questions help us not be so dismissive of other perspectives, in the sense of, I want to understand that other person's perspective, even if I think it's completely moronic.
Right.
And I think that helps us as well, because now we're saying, okay, clearly we're on a different wavelength, but let's ask a few questions. And then you start recognizing, wow, we're not that far off. We're not that different. And we had this the other day, a conversation where we both had the same goal. We're trying to determine whether or not we wanted this particular marketing strategy. And you're saying, well, this makes sense, but you're asking my opinion of it. And I'm posing back saying, well, here's the question mark in my head. And by even voicing, instead of a statement of being like, well, there's the problem, as of being like, this is what I'm thinking about, and making it a question mark even in that sense, gives a broad agency of saying, we're on the same team, and this is just what I'm thinking
and we're going to work together to actually find the best solutions, like inviting somebody else in, not, like, yes, you hired me to lead marketing.
Yes.
And so it's like, instead of coming and trying to be a hero in that conversation of like, here's exactly how it should be done. Like, I assume that I know everything. Like, I'm like, hey, what perspective do you have? I'm inviting that perspective in because I value your perspective. So anyway, yeah, I think that was it. We don't always have conversations that go that way, that well, but I felt like that was one to where it was like, we were aligned around the goal. We, cared about what the other thought.
Does something come to mind in a sort of a negative as a contrast to that, where we've had a moment where we're not on the same page about something, and was it more statements involved in that situation as opposed to
I think
questions?
Probably so. Yeah, and not like definitive statements.
Yep.
But instead of being like open-ended about something, it made it feel closed off, like a response one way or another. Like, well, I don't think that should be the way it is, instead of like, why do you think that should be the way it is? Or, you know what I mean? Like, just inviting, like trying to understand versus shutting it down. I think both ways, with anyone. I think it's important.
One powerful thing about questions is you give the other person space to arrive at a different opinion as well. How often do we change our own minds about things based on different sets of facts? And I think and not questions like, what were you thinking when you decided to do that? I mean, that's not a question. It's a statement posed as a question. Right. But it's this, because so many times in conversations with people we love and care about, you'll present something to them, and we've been thinking about it for weeks, and first time they've ever heard about it. And so therefore it's this initial reaction can sometimes be, well, I don't know about that. And what they're saying is not dumb idea.
Yeah.
What that person's saying is, I just heard about this.
Yeah,
I'm not
I
ready
need
to
to
make a
think about
decision.
this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then you give the other person space by saying, well,
Mhm.
let's have a conversation about it.
Yeah, let's circle back.
As opposed to making a statement, giving the person some time to think
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, we veered off topic
We
a little
did.
bit, but
We
it was
did.
like
I think it was valuable.
when do we
Yeah.
ask questions, right?
Yeah, I think another time of when you should be asking a lot of questions, and maybe more questions than you're currently asking, is when you're trying to sell something,
Mhm.
right? You're trying to win a customer or change someone's mind about something. I think kind of those two things can go hand in hand a little bit. But you want to get on the same page. You want to get on the same playing field. And I think questions, they build trust with people. And so if you can become an expert at asking questions and like getting to the truth of things, I think that's a big thing about sales is your customers are not bad people. They're not trying to lie to you, but they do have their guard up because they don't want to be like taken advantage of. You know what I mean? And so it's like they're going to, there was something, and I might be getting ahead on this, but there was a statement in some of the sales training to where it was like, if a customer asks you, like, what do you do or what are you great at or what solutions do you provide? Don't ever spill your candy in the lobby was like the statement behind that of like, don't ever rattle off everything that you do because you have to instead understand what it is like and uncover what they're actually looking to achieve for them so that you can speak to it with trust there versus like, oh, they're just another contractor that or whatever, the industry may be. And so I thought that was a really good call out of when you're actually selling something, becoming an expert at questioning and not just like one question or like, oh, I have my list of 10 questions that I ask in pre-construction, or whatever it is. Like not high level, but just actually getting to the truth of like, well, how have you had this experience before? Have you gone through a construction project before? How did that look? What did that project look like? What was the did you arrive at the end goal? So that you can actually understand their perspective and where they're coming from. And so I think trying to understand like the perspective, we've talked about that and the stories that are their truth.
Yep.
I think is super important in trying to change someone's mind. And I'm not saying that in a way of like being manipulative, but just trying to, I guess that kind of sounds manipulative.
Well, but
change someone's opinion. I'm like,
well,
I'm trying to get you to change your
but
opinion.
sometimes the truth is different from what somebody thinks it is.
Yeah. Okay. That's
And
that's
so
a
it's
good call
not you trying to just get them to see your way. It's
Right.
just being like, I think objective truth is actually different from what they believe.
Yeah. That's a good
And so
point.
therefore I remember having this very long, drawn out conversation with a college roommate, and he was arguing a position that driver's licenses were unconstitutional.
Mhm.
And I took the countering position. and I just was asking questions of like, well, how would you be able to ID somebody if you don't have some sort of, and they're state level. They're not federal licenses. We're not talking about federalized, which I think is something we shouldn't do. But
Right.
like, you need to be able to say that person is who they say they are at a traffic stop, whatever it is. You say, okay,
Yeah.
this is the person and that they say they are.
Right.
And we debated for an hour on this topic, and I asked a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And I remember feeling halfway through the conversation this really like just deep frustration. I'll be like, this feels so stupid. Like
that we're having this conversation.
yes.
Yeah.
And is it even worth it? And I think that is something you have to lean into in
Mhm.
asking questions of being like, okay, don't blow it
Mm-hmm.
by blowing up.
Yeah.
But saying, okay, that person has a very strong belief in this and almost take the position of like, can they convert me?
Mhm.
So you're asking questions not in the sense of trying to convert them, but saying, okay, well, they really believe this is the
Mhm.
truth. Let's get at why they believe so strongly about it.
Mhm.
Eventually he got to the point, and I remember just pushing past that. And this is obviously poor example in the sense of a very meaningless conversation,
Yeah,
but nonetheless, we're friends, we're talking about something. And he got saying, huh. And he stopped and he said, yeah, I think the intellectually honest thing to do is change my opinion about this. And he's like, you work through all the motions, you work through all the questions, all the viewpoints. And then he got to the point of saying, yeah, that does kind of make sense.
Hmm.
It took an hour over something silly. But I think we're going to have moments like that
Yeah.
with our customers.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have moments like that with our employees.
Yeah.
And with our vendors, where you need to ask questions to try to understand a different perspective.
Yeah.
And sometimes you'll need to adjust your perspective,
Yeah.
and other times they're going to adjust theirs.
That's good.
And sometimes you're going to meet in the middle.
Yep. That's good. I think you spoke to when we were prepping for this, just the element of asking questions of yourself. Elaborate on that a little bit. You know what you were saying was, I think, so good about like interrogating even what you believe.
Yeah.
Asking questions of yourself. Do you have an example of that or like a story about that?
Oh my word. This is something that is actually just a routine part of everybody's life. The simplest thing to do to explain an event is just to make an assumption.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the simplest thing. Somebody
Mm-hmm.
cuts you off in traffic. We make an assumption about who's in that car.
Mm-hmm.
What a turd.
Yeah.
I mean, what just a terrible human being
Yeah.
driving that thing. We can make that kind of assumption about a customer. They didn't pay their bill. Oh my goodness, what a cheapskate, nasty person. You know what I mean? Like they're trying to rip me off. And so we make these assumptions about events, and it's the simplest thing to do because we can just project on that person about what even previous experiences. Well, we had one guy that didn't pay us before. That person was a complete cheat, and so therefore this
all
person
signs are pointing to
the same way.
Yeah.
And I think the questioning our, the questions we have to ourselves is challenging those stories and saying, are they really true? And so many times, my wife and I were driving. And this guy is let me set the scene. We're on I-44, 70 mile an hour speed limit.
Mm-hmm.
There's this old 1970s fire truck in the right lane, and he's got his lights on in the back, but they're like ding dong, they're not like lights and sirens. It's just like sort of like lights going back and forth.
Okay.
And so highway back, this guy's going like 55 miles an hour, so way under the speed limit. And this guy is driving right next to the fire truck, not passing him. 55 miles an hour. He would go up, that fire truck would speed up, he'd speed up. That thing would slow down, he'd slow down. And it was just like, get out of the way. What are you doing? And I'm thinking, what an idiot, just trying to tick everybody off on the highway. Yeah. And my wife, who's a lot kinder and wanting to see another, Mary. Yeah. She's like, well, maybe he thinks that he shouldn't pass that fire truck because the lights are on. Right. Maybe he just thinks you shouldn't pass an emergency vehicle. Right. And so therefore we just sit back here and we're gonna wait this one out. Yep. And that's a kinder perspective. But I'm thinking, I'm making the assumption this guy's sole motive for being on the highway because I'm ticked off is because he's trying to tick everyone off. Yeah. It's very interesting, isn't it? Yes. And that guy probably is thinking to himself of like, well, should I pass? Should I not pass? He's probably, whoever's driving that vehicle. There's just a basic example of something, but this is life. Yeah. It sounds like trying to assume the best in people. I feel like we're getting into counseling. It sounds like we're not psychologists.
Yeah, working on
don't want to mess anybody up.
Yeah, assuming the best in people though, and then and asking them their perspective so that way you can know what's actually true about that person instead of assuming what you think is true based on everything else that you've experienced in life. Yeah, and the question to ourselves is also. Business is bad. We don't have enough money in the account, or we're having trouble with an employee, we're having trouble with a customer, and the stories we feed ourselves in those moments can often be the wrong thing. Yeah. The interesting thing about that is sometimes the perspective reset comes from talking to somebody else about that, of not your friend, not somebody just take your side, but just some objective person and just saying, can you help me out with this? Because I'm feeling this way, and set the scene and be fair to the other person too, because sometimes we lead the conversation with how terrible that person is, and the motives are defined in the question as opposed to just leaving it open. And this is the event that happened. What should I make of it? Yeah. And oftentimes we'll find out there's less nasty behind what's going on versus what we're feeding ourselves. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. And I'm thinking of other scenarios we'd ask ourselves questions too, just process-wise as well. Of we say, well, this is the only way to do it. Well, maybe it's not. Maybe we need to look into it more. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for it, or invite people into that. That's good. We touched on early, like the title, really of the podcast is "Smart People Ask Questions." So maybe speak to the why you would ask questions. Like, what's the goal of asking good questions? Why even consider it, right? Yeah. Because I feel like I like to hear other perspectives and I do ask questions, but then I think about, I think I lead with statements and then ask questions, So I'm actually guiding a lot of conversations unintentionally, but instead of seeking another perspective first and then, and then coming around the other way, I think I tend to lead with a statement, or here's what I think about the thing. What do you think? Which is not a true gauge on what the other person's thinking, because they might modify their answer to be agreeable, right? So what's the goal? There's a couple of different ways of phrasing questions. One is the multiple choice, and that is being like, well, these are the ways you could think about something, and so it's so tempting to do. In fact, I had a conversation with, I think, one of our team members about something where it's like, well,
these are the perspectives they could have about something.
Mm.
No, I remember the context now. It was actually with our foreign exchange student of just, this could be a motivation, this could be motivation, that could be kind of like giving her liberty to kind of speak. And it's like, well, what if none of those were? And she could just grab one because
It's easy,
those are
low-hanging
the end.
fruit, yeah.
Right. Well, he thinks that this should be
That
the
sounds
answer.
good,
So that
so
I'll run with that one.
Yeah, that's true.
As opposed to being like, I really want to understand your perspective and I don't understand this. Can you help me?
Can you speak?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
And then we find out there's a totally different motivation. And so avoid the multiple choice. And then leading the questions, the other one that we tend to fall into. I mean, I do it too. Of just being like, well, I mean, don't you hate it when people do that? And what do you think about that?
Yeah.
And then be like, well,
sounds like social media.
Right, exactly.
Yikes.
Yeah. There's only one way to think about this.
Yes.
Well, how do you think about it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So two things to be careful of.
Yeah. And I think the why is so that you don't why get better at asking questions is so you don't look like an idiot too.
Such
so
a
that
good
it's
point.
like you can glean other perspective, other wisdom, other insight before just blurting out your response or your answer, which may or may not be right, because I think we have a tendency to want to be right.
Sort of perception that the other person has of
I think
you.
so.
Yeah.
Of like, I want to appear smart in this
Yeah.
thing,
Right.
so I'm going to
Yeah.
say everything I know about it. It kind of
Right.
goes back to that spilling the candy in the lobby thing
Yeah.
that I was saying a little bit ago. I'm going to say everything I know about it so that I appear to be smart. It's like the appearance of that versus actually being wise and learning from other people.
I think this something has to do with some personality types as well, because
Yeah, probably so.
we share a personality type, and that is the one it's really, as an Enneagram 3, it's like this more or less wanting to achieve a lot, and to push a lot, to impress people, to be on your A game all the time. And so therefore questions can almost feel like a just sort of like the opposite of that,
Right.
of being like, Kinsey, how do you
I'm
feel
not
about
impressive
this?
about
No,
this,
I'm
or-
not
yeah,
impressive at
right.
all. In fact, do I even know what I'm talking about? And so, and I think that's a lie. It's a misunderstanding of questions. And obviously you can ask dumb questions,
Well, yeah.
but nonetheless, if you're a good question asker, that doesn't make you dumb. That makes
Right.
you actually humble, and other people understand of like, you don't know everything.
Right.
Everyone understands that everyone does not know everything.
Yeah.
We all,
We all know that person that
Right.
thinks they know everything too.
Right. But nonetheless, we're saying, well, the assumption that there's limitless amounts of knowledge and nobody can have it all. So therefore, why shouldn't we be asking
Right.
questions? The smart people do ask the questions
Yep.
because they're getting smarter by asking more questions. They're being inquisitive. They're
Yeah.
being they're sponges that are absorbing new knowledge. And so when we approach something of like, I am capping my knowledge because I'm not asking questions,
Right.
as opposed to I am opening up opportunity. I mean, I think this has really panned out in my own life. Even as a kid, I had this misconception that asking questions would make me look stupid. I don't want to be the one asking of like, well, why? Or how's that work? And that really limits your business ability to capture things.
Right.
As opposed to finding how that opportunity to ask questions, not necessarily just of people, but of books, of resources.
Yeah.
You're inquisitive. It's like, how do I level up here? How do I learn more about it?
Yeah. I think one thing that I was just thinking about when you were talking about that is just like in the construction space right now, we talked about the 41% retiring in the next 7 years and how much need there is for mentorship and training and growth and all these things. And it's like, we have to get to a point, young people who are entering into the space and older people who've been in it for a long time, we have to get to the point to where it's like we can actually communicate and see each other's perspectives. So that way, like, the industry can thrive.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, construction can continue.
Yeah.
Construction can grow. And, I think interest, too, right? Like, there's education has, standard education, right? College. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to get a good job. And, like, all, you know what I mean? Like, that perspective of education has hurt the trades a little bit, right? Like, we know that. Like, it's limited who's going to trade school and things like that. The pool is smaller. And so I think, especially over the next few years, it's like, man, if we as an industry can be humble and like help people grow and ask questions and like even, if people have been in it for a long time, like trying to seek a perspective from a younger generation, I think super important. I think there's things that a younger generation can give insight on and things that the younger generation needs to be asking tons of questions of the older generation, because there's going to be a huge gap in craftsmanship if we can't actually achieve, or find some ground there.
Yeah. It's interesting how that question mark that should be going off in people's heads. I think even learning how to ask good questions and getting feedback on questions, because you all know that person is just annoying by their questions. And it's not necessarily as though they're even wanting to learn. They're just questioning everything because they don't believe it. It's almost they're a skeptic, not a learner. And so you don't want to be that person of just being like, well, why is that? As in though being the devil's advocate.
Yeah.
That's not a question. You're not trying to learn. Yeah. Because if you really wanted to find a countering perspective, you go find another resource. If somebody tells you this is the way it is and you say, I don't think that is, well, go question. I do it all the time.
Yes.
You're smiling. You're like, yes, you do.
Yes, you do.
And I think that's how I capture information, though. Somebody will say, this is the way life is, very matter-of-factly. This is the way we should do something. That may or may not be true. And I've been burned enough times and that I'm not trying to have a debate with somebody that's providing me their knowledge and perspective on something and being like, that's how they feel about it. Very helpful. Thank you for telling me your information. Now there's other perspectives, and do they align?
Yeah. Yeah. That's good.
Yeah. Is that the only way of doing something? No, it's not.
Yeah. So, I mean, how would you mentioned asking, like, how do you ask great questions and like the way you're asking questions? What are some ways of doing that? Like, practically speaking, if you were like, I mean, I don't know, I'm thinking of like a conversation of like how you actually got to the truth with somebody or whatever, but like, can you give an example of like, what are great questions to ask? Like, I know it depends on the scenario.
Yeah. Well, let's think about scenario one being with customers, like as a part of construction, and some of the questions you brought up earlier were fantastic, of just being about previous experiences. Have you had remodeling work done before? Have you had trade work done before? Just getting some context for, how was that experience?
What were some things that went well? What were some things that didn't go well?
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then if it's with, if you're hiring, interviewing people, a lot of that questions are key, and being able to get to how people think about things. One question I'd use frequently when asking, or when we hire people, even here, is just, what's your best skill? And people, I can do anything. And I force them to say, no, but what are you the best at? Yeah. What are you really good at? And when you don't get a good answer to that, you realize here's somebody that really doesn't have a skill.
Yeah.
Because they don't believe in themselves in one category, and they're trying to mask that by saying, whatever you want, boss, I can do it. And like, no, you can't. Yeah. Like, nobody's that good. Yeah. What is the thing you're most proud of? Yeah. And it also shows somebody as well that's not necessarily focused in on something that they want to be excellent at. It's just being like, they're trying to find their way.
Yeah. No, that's a great call.
And then,
what about like vendors?
Yeah, vendors. A lot of times you're working on pricing or so you're understanding, the industry. And sometimes questions are very disarming too, because you work with guys that there's almost this conflict of, some of the guys that I've worked with, they look at me, I look at them. Who's the smartest guy in this room is sometimes kind of the unspoken kind of perspective. Yeah. Instead of being like
I'm stronger than that guy.
Yeah, right. Yeah. How much can you bench press?
Yeah.
So instead of going to that person, like, they have skills and knowledge that I don't have, and they will always be that way. And so let's stop pretending, and then vice versa. I probably know things that they don't. Right. And so therefore it'd be like, how can I learn as much as I can from that guy? And so it's more or less a, this relationship, this complementary relationship. And so you're asking questions about products. Guide me through that. Is that, any new products coming out, or, and you're disarming that person of now they're realizing here is somebody that wants to learn. Here's somebody that I can be a friend with.
Well, and is interested in what they're interested in.
Good point.
Too. Yeah. That's good.
And there's so much knowledge you just randomly capture by asking questions. Yeah. But not be annoying about it either. Not question. Then you feel like you're being interrogated. Right. It's just finding the right timing for the casual questions that leads into a conversation, back and forth. Yeah. We don't want to go from one extreme to the other. Never ask a question to be just like, oh my word.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right. You're right.
Have you, did anything stand out to you, like as questions that people have asked as a part of like even experience here working with clients or with our team?
I think one thing that I've noticed and I don't do is in the way that you ask questions. Actually, if someone makes a statement, you'll always follow up with like a question. I mean, not always, but like a lot of times, or even if somebody asks you a question, you like repeat it in how you understand the question. And so that way it's like, oh, are we actually talking about the same thing? Like what I'm hearing you say, like, which is very counseling. Like,
right.
Like what I'm hearing you say is this, but you like recap and repeat back. And I think that there's a lot of value in that, because then it's like, okay, I'm being heard. in our conversation, and I'm able to, if that's not at all what I'm saying, I'm able to correct, okay, that wasn't clear. I'm able to like try a different way of communicating, my perspective or questioning and things like that. So
one of the things that when you're saying that is one of the reasons why I feel like I want to do more of that is because how often we actually are not on the same page
Right.
as far as whoever I'm talking to and recapping it. But like actually what I was meaning was this. And it's like frequently, probably 50% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's another element of my role in facilitating the questions between other people in a room as well. We have a team meeting about something and somebody says, well, that's not the way it is. And I'm like, well, that's not even what he said.
Yeah.
But we can make that a question mark. Like, I don't think that's what
you meant. Is that,
what the statement is here. And no, it's not.
Is this what you meant? Yeah. Yeah, or whatever. Yeah. No, you're right.
Yeah.
Which helps with a team perspective, especially because if a skill, because like we talked earlier, questions are a skill, and being a great question asker is a skill. A questionnaire.
Yeah.
I don't know what the word is, but
inquisitive person.
Yeah, being inquisitive is a skill, and it's something to grow in. And so having somebody, I guess if you are not great at that, surround yourself with people who are, so that way you can learn from how they do it.
It's one of those things where you don't really notice it unless you pay attention, because if you're not used to doing it, you find people that ask questions.
Yeah.
It's sort of like people that make you feel good by just being good at conversation. Yep. You take it for granted.
Totally.
Just like they're just amazing communicators, and you just say, well, that's just Bob is just amazing.
Yep.
Instead of being like, that's a person that applied himself to know how to communicate.
Yeah.
And he thinks about, what's that person thinking about? How do I make them feel comfortable? How do I make them feel at ease? How do I understand their perspective? Like that's a person that studied human beings. That just pop out of his mother and be like, maybe some people that way, but
No, you're right. It's funny, whenever my husband and I started dating, I remember he had a best friend who's a very good friend of ours now, and he's excellent at just like getting to like where your heart's at and how are you doing, and like, you know what I mean? Like really caring about people. Yeah. And I was like, I need to study him. Like, how does he do that? Like, how does he get you to talk? I can't get you to talk that low, And, we've been married for 10 years now. So it's like, I'm getting better at like understanding how to, like, we get better at understanding how to communicate with each other because we do, and we practice and we try and we, all the things. But I remember early on just observing excellent communicators and people who ask great questions and care about people. And it is so, I don't know, it's so humane, it's what I think draws people to other people.
As you're saying that, I'm thinking about how you study people and see things that are positive or negative and want to replicate the positive things and say, how do I be more like that? And I think that's a fantastic quality. And so often we're limited by just the blinders we have on, and just being, just sort of dismissive of other people's skills. And when you recognize somebody else having a skill, whatever that is, and there's almost like when we don't have something that we don't value, we're dismissive of it. I mean, like, person is so soft. He's just, so political, peacemaker. Aren't they the worst? Just get in there and say how it is. Instead of recognizing, well, maybe there's a balance here. Maybe there's a time to say, that's not right. This is, completely wrong. It's objective truth. I really think you're flat out wrong about that. Right. But even the way you go about that. Anyway.
Yeah. No, you're right.
We knew this was going to be a tough podcast to pull off because we could go so many different directions with this. Customers,
and it's so
people.
Broad.
It is broad.
Questioning is in every area of life. It's personal. It's yourself. It's everyone you work with. So I think that's what makes this really hard. But I mean, key takeaway, what are your final thoughts? I think we've been talking about questioning for a while.
If you want to be that person that's viewed as smart, capable, the person to have whatever it is that you're touching is that, that person, you have their confidence. You need to be a question asker. It shows humility. It shows that you are studying things. You want to grow. You want to learn. And I think that is a dismissed thing sometimes, as opposed to something to lean into and be like, I want to be a fantastic question asker. You disarm people. You avoid conflict. You win more. You sell more. Questions are superpower. And if you don't have the skill, it's just a practice. And, at family, or, with your spouse, with your kids. And you, like anything, the less you do of it, you just don't expect to
You're
be
not
great
as
at
good,
it if
yeah.
you're not used to doing it.
Yep.
But you lean into it.
Yep.
You start doing more of it. And I think we all start there. I think
good.
all of us start with just basic skills and hopefully level up from there.
That's good. Yeah.
And
Build the skill.
Yeah, build
It's
a
fun.
skill. Yeah. And some people are amazing at this already.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot to learn from people, and love some comments from you guys too. What are the questions you ask people that you found really work? Customers, employees.
Yeah, we'd love to hear
check-ins with people too. Like those are, I mean, we didn't even get into that,
Yeah,
but
we didn't.
good questions
Yeah.
on, weekly or monthly reviews with people. What
With
are
your
those?
team, whatever that
Yeah,
looks
right.
like,
But
yeah.
there's so many uses for questions.
Yeah. What are some great questions? Leave them in the
Yeah.
comments.
There we go, guys.
We'll see you next time.
See you next time.